sharp.
So, hi everyone. I just want to know, I'm happy that we, Alexis Gautier here, we met in your exposition in Leuven, and I really liked that this work is combining narratives and collaboration, like it's also and sculpturing and drawing and textiles. So yeah, that's why I invited you. I guess who's coming to dinner, so enjoy.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chris. Good evening. It's like being at the theater. I'm not on stage, but it's like. But I basically don't really see you. Maybe we should, we should do this.
Should
so
I
can see
change
some.
the lights a bit?
No, I mean
No
I
worries.
should have a. If someone has a cap,
Could
could I have your cap, maybe?
I change the lights?
Cap.
I mean, it's adjusted, but
Ralph Lauren. Yeah, very good. So that's actually it's really nice. Thank you. Yeah, much better. I'm gonna let this guy on hold for a bit. That's already much better. I'll keep it in case it's too much. I'm gonna read a few things tonight. They're short stories, which are written very loosely in the train today, yesterday, and the day before. And I've written those stories also puzzling some things and fictions from the past. And it's an articulation of works, research, tests, failures, and a bit of ideas for the future as well. A lot of material which is in the images I will show you is also in the book that we published last year together with Nico, who also designed it. So if it's of interest, I'll pass it through and you can, flip through it. It combines, it's a little bit of a visual essay through the work woven by Nico for the most part. And for the other part, it's a written essay, especially by one writer called Brian Dillon from Cabinet magazine in London. And they both sort of wove their own navigation through the work. So if you don't know the book, you should have a look. Okay. I'm happy that this is a small committee because it's partly embarrassing. It's really a premiere for me. But it's good. I'm happy to try it. Okay. How I've seen a car rushing backwards through the streets, lights off at down. Fumes coming out from the slightly opened windows. It was no fire smoke, but something closer to a smoke machine running inside the car. Driving past the fruit shop, the car slowed down and stopped. The man grabbed 4 oranges and cut 1/5 in half. How he went back to the car, carefully placed 1 orange through each open windows, firmly stuck between the glass and its frame. Holding the last half orange in his hand, he slowly walked around the car, firmly pressing the fruit against it. How I've seen him jumping back in the car, burning his tires away in circles. He then disappeared around the next corner, leaving behind a smell of burnt rubber. And how I realized that I cannot remember the color of the car. How I find it exhausting to not be able to make choices, and how the notion of decision-making or not making decisions smuggled its way through the work. How I could only agree with Italo Calvino in his book, If on a Winter's Night a Traveler, 1979, when he says, the ideal position for reading a book, for instance, is something you can never find. In the old days, they used to read standing up, as a lectern, at a lectern. Nobody ever thought of reading on a horseback. And yet now the idea of sitting in the saddle, the horse saddle, the book propped against the horse's man, seems attractive to you. Having your feet up is the first condition for enjoying a read. How I always like to fall asleep in institutions, museums or other art spaces, taking long naps discreetly or conveniently in front of video works or other works. And how waking up in front of it is one of the best ways to look at art. How I had a bike accident in Brussels when I collided with another cyclist. How I cannot remember the details as I shortly lost consciousness, and how neither my father and I could understand how my back wheel had wove itself with the other person's bicycle. How my father found a bicycle lock and spent nights to look for the code. How much dust on the ground. The man brooms it together. His movements are loose, alone in the hold of an empty cargo boat. They sail down the main river in Frankfurt and pass under my feet, under the bridge. Observing them from this angle, from the bridge itself, the broom moves as the man moves, as the boat moves, as I move, and nothing sits still. How movement became a way of looking, and how I got obsessed by the group of men shooting arrows towards the sky in the Josaphat Park in Schaerbeek in Brussels. How my friend Angdiku, who lives in Nepal, keeps sending me pictures of herself with the white t-shirt that I gave to her. It's the t-shirt that I had made with a painting from Casper, showing the making process of a Nepali textile she had made. She's on the right side of the image. How I got hired as a taxi driver for a couple of days in 2021 in Leuven, picking up people for narrative loops along the ring road of the city, trying to define a center from its periphery. How the car I was driving acted as the lens of a camera, with landscape, movement, and cinema coalescing into one and the same. How stupid I felt when they kept calling me Taxi Alexi, and how I made this drawing as a business card for my rides. How in the desert of Saudi Arabia, they organize contests in which one has to drive the longest stretch possible on only 2 wheels. In a balancing act. It is technically possible if you take 20% of air pressure down 2 tires on one side of the car. How I would love to try this once. And how I fell in love with the way the contesting drivers measures the distance made during a figure. While holding the driving gear in their right hand, they hold a piece of charcoal in their left hand. Down through the window, as they're bending on the left-hand side, tracing a line of black charcoal on the asphalt as they drive. This helping them to measure who has the longest drive. How my little Photoshop skills helped in making myself a fake boat license to be allowed to conduct a boat shuttle in Frankfurt. How I got stopped by the police, the river police, on that sunny day, and how I still don't understand that they just said Guten Tag and faire Reise, as they didn't realize it wasn't a real license. How from the same boat I managed to stop a cargo train by shooting a single arrow with a bow. How happy I felt in Marseille, laying on the deck of a boat, looking up to the sail, and seeing the patterns I had drawn moving with the wind. How all the sails gathered by Nico and Cari Gonzalez formed a choreography in which everyone was at once the work itself and an audience for the other works. How I failed in following Richard Tuttle's advice when he said, Marseille, it sounds wonderful. You need to make sure that your boat makes all the other boats beautiful. How I got jealous of the door that Marcel Duchamp had built in his Paris apartment, a door in a corner, which always leaves one side open, one side closed. How I found my way through that door by building a wall in an exhibition space in 2 parts. Oh, wow. Building a wall dividing an exhibition space in 2. So the wall divides the space in 2, sorry. I inserted 2 doors at the entrance. One saying told, the other one saying shown. And how I invited the audience to choose between either one side or the other. How tasty was the tea that I served the audience in the told room, while giving them a guided tour of an empty room, talking about the works they could not see and which were physically present only in the other room. How in the shown room this was not meant to happen. The audience was deprived of descriptions, text or language in a room filled with objects. How much the work existed only in the interstice between the 2 spaces, in the gaps and overlaps, in people's conversation following the show. How free I felt in telling people about the work without showing them anything, and how close I felt to my intentions, and how gravity did not exist. How we realized in Leuven at the M show that many of the walls of the museum have hidden corridors within them, used as shortcuts between the rooms for the guards, and how some of the guards started to hang a couple of their own works within the walls for making an exhibition of their own. And we together decided to call it the second museum. How this use of space, of interstice, encouraged me to collaborate with the guards of the museum to create a series of pocket works. Objects, stories, behaviors, which they could activate to the audience at any moment of their choice, at any time of the day, in any rooms of the museum. Alex, a museum attendant and a former priest, swims down the corridor and slowly takes a tennis ball out of his pocket. Almost whispering, he tells me that a silkworm has spun a continuous thread of 900 meters around a single ball. Softly caressing the ball, he insists it is a color you have never seen before. 2 taps, a single shot, fired through the space. The smell of burnt rubber disperses through the air conditioning system, dispersed under a sole, in the lining of a jacket, or in a pocket. How Marike, the HR person of M, accepted to hire me temporarily as a museum attendant among the 24 others. In that museum, the attendants aren't guards like the staff or of other Belgian museums. They don't wear uniforms, and instead of looking after the works, they are instructed to keep an eye for suspicious behaviors. How I remember Dominique Merci, a dancer of the Pinabausch Tanztheater company, tapping the ashes of his cigarette in his coffee and drinking it. How Shijian, the left-hand person on the picture, and his friends have it differently. They let their cigarette burn slowly, endlessly, held between their lips as they fabricate a porcelain sheet, larger than a door, and yet thinner than a little finger. As their hands are busy flattening the clay, the cigarette ash falls unnoticed onto the clay, and how the ash will reappear by mistake after the firing process, making a galaxy of dark spots on the porcelain. How the following time we decided to do it deliberately. We purchased 8 kilograms of cigarettes and burned it down to 500 grams of tobacco ashes. In a smoke-filled room, we fired the ashes on a single sheet of porcelain, turning into an ash glaze in the shade of a green-brown. This one, sorry, one late. How museums are all about doors, and how I wanted to replace them by their porcelain counterparts, scattered through different corridors of the museum, through different exhibitions and times. How this idea failed because of safety issues and emergency firing exits. How a work speaks of its own impossibility and contains all possible variations. How it took 3 months to get it through the customs because they thought that all the small packages were mostly something illegal. How I got to know that the ambiguous greenish grey seen on several of the porcelain sheets is known as celadon. It's a historical color discovered via an accident in the firing process, never defined, ever enigmatic. For centuries, celadon ceramics were not crafted for practical use, but for pure contemplation. How Richard Tuttle bypassed my invitation to work with the windows that you see on the right side by describing his contribution as follows. It could be drawing, it could be paint, it could be the floor itself, who knows. It is large circular swaths of grey marks of some kind that can be followed. Little mountain ranges are placed 1 foot away from each other. This is done in a terracotta color with a still wet material. It is done slowly, deliberately. The little ship-like segment can sail through the circular arcs. Some of these would be stepped on during the exhibition, grinding into the grey dust. It could be quite beautiful, but mostly people would try to avoid them. This could create a general nervousness, like love walking through the exhibition. They can be walked upon until dry, then left forever, because they make a new floor lying over the old. How I got to know about this pigment, this is improvisation. How I got to know about this pigment, which is a crystal which is melted in warm water, and how it is used by a group of people in Guizhou in the central province of China to change the color of fabrics from green to purple. And how I went there with 2 friends to ask if they could use me as a piece of cloth and as a material to be transferred through that color. How we built a piece of metal so I could be hanging above fire, because it's a technique which uses the smoke of juniper to provoke a color reaction and to turn green into purple. How they accepted to work with me as a material, I could say, and how it lasted for 5 days before I turned into purple. I will show you one video as a side note of that part of the work. And how a couple of days later on the market, by chance, I found really, really crazy old packagings of cigarettes, which were called Golden Monkey. And as you maybe read in the subtitling of the grandmother's interview, she finger points at me and she says, he was like the tripping Monkey King. And the Monkey King was a figure, a trickster. I didn't know. It's a literature character, and it's a monkey that it's a novel written in the 9th century in China, and it is someone who navigates between reality and fiction, and who bothers a lot of people. Let's say along his route, and the Emperor of China wants to get rid of him a couple of times, and it never succeeds. The last thing he tries is to attach the monkey above a fire to have him to suffocate to death, and it fails. And from that day, the Monkey King is allowed or able, let's say, able to see the difference between reality and fiction, because it sharpened his eyes. And how I find that packaging with Golden Monkey cigarettes, and how I made a small edition of cigarettes filled with juniper. Juniper is the plant that they use to provoke the color change. And it became a sort of a dyeing set, a dyeing pack, something that one could use to change the color of fabric by simply smoking a cigarette, which is something we did on my back, and it crazily enough worked. The daughter of the grandmother that we saw in the video had 3 cigarettes on my back, and my whole shoulder was purple. I've met this person working near Shanghai, Rui Fen, and Rui Fen raises silkworms. Silkworms that are usually making cocoons in the shape of a real cocoon. But here they're trained to not weave cocoons, but to spill their silk on a flat table. And I was visiting Rui Fen, and I went to his office, and I said, if one can take the let's say, the surface of one table, could one take also the surface of an object? And he said, oh, come, I have another office. So he took me through the corridors, and then we discovered this one beautiful wooden desk with in its middle one world globe, which had been covered of silk by silkworms spinning around it for 3 years. And it became this white clouds that, that lost all geographies. And this is a piece that we made by having silkworms for 3 days. So it's still very transparent. And how I asked him if we could try to make a pair of socks, and how I had to shave my hairy legs because the silkworms would get entangled in my hair, and how I could slit the sock at its back to be able to remove it slightly. How this got stuck in the customs and it arrived 2 years after the show. And how we didn't get to know the recipe of a secret glaze. But as you maybe know, silkworms are fed with mulberry leaves exclusively because it's made of protein. And this very same protein has the capacity to leave a trace when you burn it on ceramics. And I here made a sort of crushed mulberry leaves pigments, which once dispersed on porcelain and once burned is something you can draw with. Okay, 5 more minutes. I'll show you quickly another part. Maybe I can read this one. My friend Peter sent me last year a computer screenshot. It was a betting website called Unibet. It's a website dedicated to sport gambling. And on this website, a professional tennis player named Alexis Gautier was represented with a picture of myself. How I collected images of the match he played, and how I invited him to play a game with me in the exhibition space in Leuven at the end of the show, for which the exhibition room merged into a tennis court. That's 10 years ago. He looks really young. And how by Googling it a little bit further, I stumbled upon quite a few people, weirdly enough, with a sort of sport presence. And this one was quite nice because it says Alexis Gautier quoting, "I'm no artist," which is an interview of this horse rider, France champion horse rider, 2016. And how I got in touch with 39 of them and asked them if one would be interested in a collaboration or sort of a collective. And it's a project which is now starting. We are in the process of either making a band, a music band, or trying to make a movie together, but we're still missing some skills. But funnily, a band, like everyone, many of them are playing an instrument. I don't, but I could learn. And I dream of gathering with all of us around an empty it's not an empty table, it's a table as a whole. How Peter Kubelka said, the power of film is that one can use the difference between the sound and the image. And how my friend Nicholas gives us a small demonstration. How in Genk at the Simijn, formerly Siap Kunstverein and newly Jester, I tried to work with a leak which came from their ceiling. They had a problem for years that they couldn't fix the glass at the rooftop. And the technician of the building could not ever source where the leak was coming from. And so I proposed to have some kind of leaking guidance from the rooftop, which I used with these sort of architectural keys that you find in churches, Christian churches, which are sort of placed at meeting points of the structure to usually carry the weight. And it's like you would have this arc, and it would be the last stone that you would put that would sort of carry the strength. And most likely it would be a carved stone with a pattern or a portrait. And how actually this worked out, that the technicians managed to follow drops with buckets because they knew sort of according to the plan where the leak would come either from their nose or from their tongues. And I'll jump to this one. I always wanted to do seal screens and never could really. But I made a show in Düren in Germany last September. And this man on the left part of the car is an Uber driver. And he picked me up in the morning, and I said I had one luggage. And then I had this humongous aluminum frames that I really stupidly didn't realize it wouldn't fit in the car. And he was like the kindest Uber driver ever, finding a solution to attach with my scarf and ropes all those frames on the rooftop. They were very special frames. They were frames that one could bind, in a curve. I don't know what this is. And there are 3 frames that I made specifically for a wall, which is in the exhibition space. It's a long 25 meters curved wall. And I wanted to seal screen against it. But obviously you can't seal screen on a banded surface, so we had to find a way around it. And so these screens allowed us to go against the wall and then screen it. That's the last video I have. Oh, I hope I had it. Do I have it? Oh yeah. It's filmed by Sydney. The pattern is for me a way of looking into textile, and textile as a way of looking and as a way of composing with spaces. And it's a tree which I've seen in a travel in Sicily. I ended up on a parking lot at night. I had no more gas and no more battery on my phone. And then suddenly on this parking lot was this really random rounded tree, but the shadow of the tree matched perfectly with this neighbor's head, so with the tree next to it. And so it sort of created a chain with which, I'll just put this one on. Created a chain that would last forever. How convenient that it's a frame that you can bend, and then if you push it hard enough, it's also flat, so you can also still screen it on a flat surface. Yeah. So, whoops. So this process gave us sort of this fresco, which is here. Whoops. It functioned a little bit as a diorama, I would say. And then in front were placed a couple of these porcelain sheets that we saw from Leuven. But these are repeating or looking back at the way they were fired. They're these sheets that are fired horizontally in the oven, in the kiln. And that gives them this sort of watery texture. Sorry, okay. And on the wall were a couple of hinges, door hinges, which were made to hold the ceramic plates. And yeah, and this is Sydney because it's the the only massage expense that we could put in our production. Because silk screening on the wall was so painful for 3 days that they accepted to grant us a massage next door. And I don't have a picture of me, otherwise I should have put it. Okay, I think I'll stop it there. And yeah, I'm happy to keep it open. So if there are things that are up in the air or questions or things you want to know more about. Yeah, let me know. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're also from the research department?
Yes.
Ah, okay. Because it reminds me that next week the subsessie is 21 or 19.
No, 20, but today we're 21. 12:30 to 2.
It's on the 21. Because so I'm also part of the research department here with Nico. And next week we're holding the soup sessions. And it's researchers which are sharing their research project for students and other researchers. And this one in particular is about a textile research, or it's a research that I do on the archive of textile of an American artist, Richard Tuttle, who's also here mentioned a couple of times. And Thomas Beiler, a German artist, a pop artist who started in the 60s, 70s, and who's still working today in Frankfurt. Two very different artists with two very different practices, who are thinking through textiles more than using textile as a medium. So I'll share some of that research that I'm doing at the moment, including a recent trip to New Mexico to visit Richard Tuttle in his studio and archive. So I'll show some of that next week. Tuesday? It's the soup session. It's called Who's Coming for Dinner? But there's no dinner, but there is soup. There's soup at the soup session, and it's lunchtime, so you're more welcome if you and I had
Thank you,
some lunch
yeah,
with us.
super.
But you have to make the soup by yourself, no?
Yes.
Yeah, but it's
One of the
collective
others.
cooking. It's even nicer because it's actually the whole session happens during cooking, so it's the best part of it.
Are there any questions for Alex? Yes.
I have
Baptiste.
a question concerning because did you make the whole costume for Romeo Gazzanichi Bros production, or was it only a part of it?
Sorry, I can't hear you. See you.
Because we saw a video of Romeo Gazzanichi Bros production with the cops, and I was wondering,
Sorry.
did you fully took part of it to make the whole costumes, or was it only a few?
I wish it would have been super nice. It was raining in Brussels that night, and I was walking around. I lived in Skavik, and that play was performed not so far. And suddenly I hear this music really loud and people singing. And I had my camera with me. I know it was my phone. And I enter the tent and I see 20 policemen dancing on French hits from the 80s. And I just started filming, and it's a fragment that I use completely out of context because I like its absurdity, and also without the music itself. It has a bit of friction of knowing if are they real policemen, but their mustache looks so wrong. I know I would have loved to, but I was just a spy in the tent, and I just used it as a waiting thing to start with.
Nice.
But yeah, it was a really good costume.
Okay, Alexis, thank you. That was really interesting.
With pleasure. Thank you.
For coming.